on November afternoon in the dark. And the good news is that we've got a fantastic research forum seminar awaiting us. Really pleased that the Start Entrepreneurship team are going to talk to us about their wonderful project involving about student entrepreneurship and placements. And it's a collaboration funded by the Office of Students with Royal Northern College of Music, the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, and the University of the Arts, and all from different sub-disciplines, which makes it more exciting. We're delighted to welcome extra guests and also to people who are watching us on YouTube. So I'm not going to do too many introductions today, except to say that I'm going to hand over in a minute to our researchers. We have a research embedded in the student project, Dr. Michelle Phillips, Dr. Keith Phillips and Dr. Nicola Pennill, our PI and two PDRAs, who are going to talk to us about the progress on the project so far. So please welcome our speakers for today's seminar.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Can everybody see that? I've pressed the share screen. Is that showing up okay? Fab, thumbs up from Pam, thank you. And is that showing right in terms of presenter view? Can you see presenter view or can you see the slides?
Presenter view.
Okay, I'm going to press swap. Can you tell me if it jumps? Has it shifted?
That's fine.
Thank you very much, Keith. It's so nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us to do this. And it's so special to be here, not only with people working on the project, both staff and students, but also it's really nice that some really people who have been so supportive and helpful in advising us and helping us have come along and given up their time. So thank you, Pam, Joe, Andy, Kamal. Thank you so much for being here and for everything you've done for the project, which has been really important. So I'm going to start and then going to hand over to Nicola and to Keith, and then I'll wrap up. But I just want to start by just giving you an overview of who this project is for, because I think it will give you an appreciation of the breadth of what this project is trying to do. And then I'll tell you some of the nuts and bolts of how the project is running. So first of all, this project is for everyone who is working within the creative arts in higher education. So it's a project that is aimed at educating our students in skills around entrepreneurship. So to give you some examples, it's a project that is for a first-year composition student who wants to bring together some of his music making from his Mexican hometown with some other colleagues who want to make music that comes from different backgrounds. It's for the first-year student who feels very strongly that there weren't enough females on the A-level composition syllabus, and she would like to do something about that. It's for the jewellery student at University of the Arts London who wants to set up her own business and wants to know next steps in terms of that. And it's for the theatre student who wants to create an app which will connect local communities with theatre performances going on in their area by new and up and coming theatre performers. So basically it's a project that concerns all of us. It's about how we train our next leaders of the creative industries. And we're so grateful that the people who've been involved in this and the breadth of expertise that we've been able to draw on and have contributed to this is very wide, and we're really thankful for that. Okay, so I'll do a brief introduction. I'll tell you a little bit about the main delivery that we've had on the project so far in this first of 2 years. And I'll focus mainly on what we've done at the RNCM. Of course, there's also 2 other institutions who are doing some similar things and some different things. And then I'll hand over to Nicola and Keith for the research, and I'll wrap up. So this is a project, as Barbara said, that is funded by the Office for Students and Research England. And that's important because I think what this project is about is it's teaching and it's research, and you can't separate that. The project is about training students in skills around entrepreneurship and then testing what works. You know, so there's a research strand built around this project which tests what works, what is most effective for students. So it's funded, we've got £902,000, and most of that money is on staff costs. It's a teaching project, so it's about developing new teaching initiatives. And it's with the RNCM, the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London, so theatre and drama students, and University of the Arts London. And they're a very large institution made of 6 colleges originally, and their students have a huge variety of disciplines, including things like fine art, fashion, jewellery, photography. They have some music, and they have lots of other artistic disciplines. And the context for the project was this. So we know that the creative industry is really important in the UK economy. We know that creativity is really important in terms of businesses, that idea of creative thinking, innovative thinking, trying things out. But we know that entrepreneurship type training is actually not that common in degree programs, so there's a mismatch there. And then that table on the right is some very recent research that only came out last month, which looked at which disciplines studied in higher education result in the highest proportion of students going into self-employment. And you can see music is number one. So in other words, there is a need to train music students to prepare them for the self-employment world. And currently there is those training mechanisms are not really in place in higher education, or not in place proportionate to the amount that they're needed. So that's the context for the project. Of course, the other context that was thrown at us that we hadn't anticipated when we applied for this funding is COVID. And I think in a way, COVID has been really awful on all our lives in lots of different ways. But for us on the project, there's also been this slight upside in that the project has become more meaningful in a way and more needed, because the need to prepare the next leaders of the creative industry is actually now quite urgent. The creative industry has changed, and it's also quite damaged following COVID. So there is a need to train our students to go out and make new things in the creative world, which is fantastic, because it's exactly what this project is designed to do. We started the project by thinking about what do we mean by entrepreneurship, and we found that this is quite a sticky subject, as lots of us know. And we decided very early on in the project that our concept of entrepreneurship is very broad. So some might define entrepreneurship in a different way to enterprise, for example, whereas we're seeing entrepreneurship extremely broadly. So it's all those skills around things like resilience, leadership, team working, creative practice, innovation, experimentation. So we spent our planning phase of the project, our first few months, with this being one of our focuses. What are we talking about when we talk about entrepreneurship? And we prioritize these things. So it has to be compatible with artistic motivation. And artistic motivation is not always the same as motivation for someone studying entrepreneurship in a business school, because a motivation for an artist might not be to make a lot of money. It might be more so for someone in a business school, it might not. But a motivation for an artist might be more around social enterprise. We wanted it to include the idea of enterprise, which is often associated with starting a business. And we wanted to be flexible, wanted the term to be really all-encompassing. So this is our working definition. It's entrepreneurship is when you act upon opportunities and ideas and transform them into value. And the value can be financial, cultural, or social. And what was really important when we settled on this definition, this broad definition, is that it was compatible with how the students saw entrepreneurship, and it was compatible with how the students would access the kinds of activities we were putting on. And what we really wanted to know was whether entrepreneurship was a word that students related to. And actually what we found was that often it isn't. Often the word entrepreneurship can be a barrier to students. And if they see a session on entrepreneurship, they think, well, I'm not an entrepreneur, that's not for me. So one of the things we have thought a lot about is what words can we use that make it clear what this project actually is with reference to these creative individuals. And this is a word cloud where we asked 253 students, what do you think an entrepreneurial musician is? This was in our induction week session. And it's quite interesting that two of the main words that come out of this, creative and innovative, are two of the main words that we've begun using. So our new module that we put in the year 3 class, we called it Creative Innovators. So we've had a large part of those early stages of the project was around terminology. What do the students relate to? How can we best represent what this project is? So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about some of the things we've put in place before I hand over to Nicola. So in terms of delivery across the whole project, so our work with students, these are some of the headlines in the first year of the project. So 2-year project. Across the 3 institutions, we've spent 5,000 hours with students, and we've put on 390 events, and we've got a lot of new industry partners, 106 new industry partners, and we've produced 131 new materials. So that's things like workshop designs for classes, speed networking designs. So we're really chuffed with that, and it's testament to the amazing people that have been involved and that have helped and advised us. We've been quite busy, and I think that's something we're quite proud of, especially given the very hard year the students have had. hopefully some of what we've been able to do has helped this really tricky year. We've been heavily informed and guided in everything we've planned by the QAA. And it's great that Andy Pennill is here, who led the design of the QAA guidance on entrepreneurship. And we refer to this diagram quite often when we think about what we put in place for the project, taking students through this journey of enterprise awareness, entrepreneurial mindset, entrepreneurial capability, entrepreneurial effectiveness. And we talk a lot about the mindset as part of the project. And what we mean by that is students feeling that they see something out there in the world, and that their values mean that they want to create something new or respond to something, and us being able to help them to develop that mindset and to take something forward, to take an idea forward. So these are the things that we've put in place at the RNCM, and some of these are in our partner institutions as well. So for example, we put in an option for the Year 3 students last year, which we called a Creative Innovators placement, which they could choose as one of their placement modules, which was where we allowed students to develop new ideas around industry challenges and to work together on project work and present to each other. We have start conversations. These are drop-in sessions for anybody, drop-in clinics, and we often have invited speakers. We had a great one today with David Taylor on adding value. So these are open to everyone, and it's one of the ways we want to make the project as accessible as possible. They're for everyone to come along and say, I've got this idea, I want to do this thing, I feel really strongly about this. What can I do? We've put mentoring in place for students. So we've got a lot of new industry partners, and wherever we can, we've tried to link up students with those partners so that they can get that extra support to take their ideas further. We had a great couple of sessions on speed networking, where students who were developing ideas, like new apps or putting together new ensembles, could come and rotate around a Zoom room and spend 10 minutes with 10 industry partners. We've got our Get Creative Fund, which is our new term for our old Entrepreneurship Award. And again, we renamed that after all the research we did around the term entrepreneurship and how that might not be the best word in order for students to relate to what we're doing. So the Get Creative Fund is an annual award open to all students where they can pitch their ideas, they get mentoring and support all along the way, and they pitch them to a panel and they can get up to £2,000. And that's always a really exciting annual event. And thanks to the START funding, we've been able to grow that. And that is very much down to Hannah McCabe, who can't be here, but is with us in spirit. The Kickstart Creative Lab has been our big event. So at the beginning of November, we ran a weekend, a kind of a boot camp, which was for students across all 3 institutions. And it was really exciting. I'm going to show you one more slide on that. And Keith and Nicola are going to mention this as well. And also, we worked with Gavin Waite, who is amazing in the work he did in revamping our compulsory Year 1 and Year 2 modules, which we call Artist Development. And Gavin has really revitalized these. And it was really interesting to work together, me and Hannah and Gavin, and talk about what we were learning on the START project and Gavin's ideas of these new modules. And it's really exciting what the students have created now that those new modules are in place. And Gavin might tell us a bit more about that in the questions. But the students have been given time and space to create new ideas and to represent their values. So it's brilliant that we've been able to take some of the START learning and for it to have a bit of an impact on the program as well, the compulsory degree program. And thanks to Gavin and his expertise. And I'll just show you one of the outputs of our entrepreneurship bootcamp, the Kickstart Creative Lab. We had a live scribe come and join us in this weekend, and she produced some images just in response to the discussions she was hearing the students having. So this is a representation of students, when students came together from across RNCM, Central and University of the Arts London. This is a representation of the kind of discussions they were having about the creative industries, about new ideas, new initiatives, the way the creative industries can impact on the world. And I think this is just beautiful. You know, it's really nice representation, I think, of how, you know, our students are incredible. Our students will change the world. We just need to give them the space. So really lovely to have that. Okay, I'll just show a few more slides. So one of the nice things we had from that event, that weekend event, was that we have quite a lot of data. And Keith and Nicola are going to show you some of this. But what was really nice was that we found that event alone met some of the goals of our project. So the students felt that in general, that was well tailored to creative industry students in particular. and that it met the project aims. But what we were really surprised at is that 26% of the students who came to this event, and we're really grateful to some of the people in the room for their expertise as part of this event, Kamal, Pam, 26 people stated that the event had impacted on their future career plans, which is quite a high number considering this was a weekend event. And the students did feel this event was accessible, inclusive, engaging and useful. And I've just put one of the quotes that somebody fed back there, which is that they said they wanted this to be a weekly thing, which none of us could cope with. We were shattered after that weekend. We needed a big sleep. So I'll just tell you, this is my last slide. I'll just show you some of the feedback we've had from some of this delivery that we've put in place. And again, a lot of this is masterminded by Hannah, so thank you to Hannah. The Creative Innovators placement that we put in went really well. And I think one of the things we found really nice, this middle quote is lovely, love this course, it was the best course I've ever completed, useful and giving me skills for life. And I think that's what we really hope to do with this project. It's about giving students the skills and the motivation and the empowerment to go off and do exciting things in their career. And the bottom one on the feedback from students just shows an example of something that we're working on. We've got a lot of feedback and a lot of data as part of the activity on this project. And it's quite exciting to take feedback about things we can work on and then change them in this current year. And Hannah and Jess as well are working on how we work on that bottom bullet point, how we give students not only placement experience in a classroom, but how they can blend that with going out and working with an industry partner. And then those bottom two quotes are from two of our industry partners who joined the speed networking. And I think what they represent really nicely is that knowledge exchange is at the heart of this project. This funding that we have from the Office for Students and Research England was a pot of funding for knowledge exchange. And our slice of that we pitched was for entrepreneurship. But essentially, it's a project that's about connecting students and industry partners for mutual benefit. And you can see there that our two industry partners absolutely found that this speed networking session was useful. So it's another example, I think, of how you give students the space to develop their ideas, to represent their values, and exciting things happen. Okay, and I'm going to hand over to Nicola.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. So we're going to talk a little bit about the research strand of this project. And I'm going to have to ask Michelle to move the slides on, if that's okay. So yeah, move on to the next one, please, Michelle. And there are three areas that we're going to focus on and that we've been thinking about in response to the needs as we see them, not only in terms of what we've been thinking around student delivery, but also the literature and the wider research context of this. But the overarching research question is around what works in HEI to support creative arts students developing these skills. And we've kind of structured it into three strands. One is to look across time in as much as we can over a 2-year period, looking at career intentions, confidence in key areas of entrepreneurial competence, and also sources of inspiration, and try and look at that across different disciplines. We're interested in what creativity means in this context, and we're also really interested in understanding if we find and when we find the change that we can identify that's needed, what the barriers are. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of background in terms of the kind of literature here, there's a few kind of key things I've just picked out. One thing we know from various research is that there are differences with the motivations and expectations of creative arts students when compared to other types of graduates. And there is evidence that they are more idealistic in some senses. They are keen to work in their chosen field. So that's a really important aspect of identity. We also know there's unique aspects of the workplace. Collaboration, co-creation are normal. And there is this underlying tension between what does it mean to be an artist, and what does it mean to be in business or to run a business? And there are tensions there. As Michelle referred to, there are also barriers around the idea of and the access to entrepreneurship skills, in that they can be seen by students as supplementary rather than core, and also not always seen as inclusive or accessible. Next slide. So the two strands of research we're going to share with you today are, first of all, a little bit about this longitudinal approach we're taking, where we're looking at all year groups across RNCM, and focusing on particularly career outcomes, sources of inspiration, and key competencies. And then the other aspect is cross institutions, and particularly focusing on creativity. So what we're trying to do here is establish research which has got some depth, so hence taking this kind of case study approach with RNCM and trying to look in detail at the different years, but then also a little more breadth by comparing and contrasting what different students in different disciplines need. Next slide. Next slide. So yeah, but there were a couple of key gaps that we identified when we were looking at the literature in this area, and we've responded to these in the design of this longitudinal study. One of those gaps was that there is a kind of lack or an opportunity for more research on tracking student development over time. And the other is how entrepreneurial education can contribute to mindset shifts. So this idea of really identifying and developing an entrepreneurial passion, and identifying what value means in terms of a given artistic practice. Next slide. So the aims of this study was to look at these three areas: careers, career intentions, how different sources of inspiration can contribute to that, and how confident students are in their key competencies. And I mentioned at different stages of study, and we've included in that, as you'll see here, so the whole pipeline, so from offer holders to alumni. So we felt it was important to kind of understand how students and graduates indeed articulate these ideas at different stages. So we're sampling the students at those 5 stages I mentioned, and there's a couple of ways we're approaching it. So primarily through survey questionnaires that are sent to students at these times, asking questions around events, people and experiences which have most influenced their ideas, their current ideas of their future work. And also we ask them to reflect on how that's changed, and how confident they are in these various areas. We're also running alongside this, we're asking open questions, which we're analysing using thematic analysis and focus groups to try and get different perspectives on these questions. Next slide. So just to share a few little bits of results. So I've picked out, as part of the survey, we ask students to identify from a list of career choices. You'll see the full list in a second. But I've picked out 4 here because these were the ones that we saw most kind of distinct difference in. So amongst the list are the options to when asked the question, what do you think you're going to do within your career? Solo artist, original band member, entrepreneur or startup, or career outside music are among those choices. They can also identify something else outside those options. But what's interesting here, just to kick this off, is if you look at offer holders, they are overwhelmingly identifying solo artist as their career choice, primary career choice. Then when we look at year 1, that's still a dominant career choice, but less so. And actually, we've got two sets of data there, so recall and current. So we asked them, what are you currently thinking, and what did you think you might want to do when you joined? And you can see they're fairly similar. So if you just move the slide on one, Michelle, thank you. So when it comes to year 3, that picture starts to change a little bit. So there's fewer identifying solo artists, and it's actually lower in their current aspiration than it was when they started, according to their best recollection. And then for year 4, next slide, this starts to be quite a divergence. So this is interesting because other choices start to become more prominent. So for example, a career outside music, entrepreneur or startup, those options start to take over from these intentions that they may have had at the start of their RNCM education, which were more around being a solo artist or original band member. And then if you move to the next slide, please. So just digging in a little more to the year 4. So these are students that are about to graduate. You can see this data in a slightly more detail. So the list on the left shows the whole range of options they're given, plus they can identify something else. But these two, so solo artist, when compared with currently and what they thought they were going to do when they joined, is significantly lower, highly significantly lower, and original band member lower. That they're significantly more likely to pursue a career outside music, or pursue a career as an entrepreneur, or establish a new venture. So there's a real change here, a real shift we're starting to see. And this is just 1 year's data. So we'll have another year's worth of data to add to this. So next slide, please. And then just to show you some of the kind of richness that we're getting from some of the qualitative data. So this is an example of where we've asked alumni various questions. We've also asked them about the questions around career intentions, but we've also asked them, what's your advice to current students? And you can see the themes there around being flexible, getting out of your comfort zone, all really good advice. But what was I've just picked out a few quotes, and the one on the top right there. So that this is sort of encapsulates a number of the themes. So they said the 2 most helpful skills in any professional role I've undertaken have been 1, to get along with others, and 2, to think creatively. Being a musician gives you a really good grounding in both. So there's this idea of transferability of skills that being a musician gives you. Next slide, please. So we've got some key findings here. So we've got this shift away from these maybe slightly more idealistic aspirations towards maybe even careers other than music. We've got also a difference in core competencies, confidence. In year 4 students, they said they were most confident in setting goals, working in a team, and least confident in applying specific business skills, such as managing finances. So that's quite useful information for us, because that tells us about some gaps that we can help to address. And in terms of sources of inspiration, students talk about them being experiences. So performance, talking to people, experiences that they've had during their time at RNCM are cited as their biggest sources of inspiration. Okay, next slide. So I'd just, before we move on to the next part of the research, there's a couple of questions which I'll just introduce here. Maybe we can come to these in the questions at the end. So this raises some questions about why and when this shift happens from the start. So a first year coming in, an offer holder, their career intentions change. Now that's to be expected, but what we could maybe seek to understand a little bit more is what's the timing of that, and what are the contributory factors. And then just next part of this slide, please. And then there's also this wide variation in how well graduates feel they're equipped. So what can we do to help them bolster their confidence in some of these transferable skills? Next slide. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand over to Keith to talk about the cross-institutional study.
Thank you, Nicola. So the cross-institutional study aims, we, as was mentioned before, put on a boot camp, which was virtual because of COVID, but involved students from all three institutions, University of Arts London, RCSS, DNR and CM. And we wanted to evaluate the effects of the weekend, the Kickstart Creative Lab, as it was called, on the creativity of the attendees, if possible. We also wanted to explore, yes, thanks. We also wanted to explore the concepts of creativity that students and recent graduates from those institutions have. Okay, next slide, please. So returning to the definition of entrepreneurship, you can see I've highlighted that creativity is integral to that. It's also one of the core competencies of the Entrecomp wheel, which has subsequently, I think, been superseded by the Entrecomp flower, but I kind of prefer the wheel. I quite like it. So creativity is integral to entrepreneurship. But there are issues, and as Pam mentioned in the chat there, it's a slippery concept potentially. It's multidimensional, multifactorial, and there's a number potentially of myths associated with creativity. Is it innate? Is it a fuzzy concept? Is it is it enhanced by groups, and under what circumstances? It's difficult to measure directly as well. And there is some literature to suggest that the results of self-report measures of creativity are quite divergent to what you might term as objective tests. So tasks such as the Divergent thinking tasks, Torrance tests, that kind of thing, that are often used as an objective measure. Another limitation of these more objective tests is that they tend to focus very narrowly on one component of creativity. So divergent thinking can be thought of in the idea generation phase as very useful to creativity, but it's not necessarily what you need in an evaluation and implementation phase. Next slide, please. So in order to interrogate whether the myths about creativity were prevalent in arts undergraduates, in the arts undergraduates that were available to us, we did a focus group on creativity, and we wanted to get at the ideas about creativity, what it is, how does it feel, under what circumstances does it happen. And we ran this group with students at the weekend, with all students from all three institutions. In addition to that, we wanted to see whether we could detect any effect of the weekend as a whole on the creativity of the attendees. So we came up with in collaboration with Kamal Birdi, who helped us with the research design of this part, we considered a pre-post test design with a control group. And we wanted to get some different measures concurrently of creativity, so we could try to triangulate and mitigate the limitations of one method by triangulating with the others. So one which test which we used as our objective test is called the Divergent Association task. And this involves naming 10 words which are as different from each other in meaning as possible. And the advantage is that the score is computed automatically. It doesn't require manual scoring. And it correlates at least as well with other measures of creativity as they do with each other. Next slide, please. We also included 5 self-rating questions of competence in finding new opportunities for innovation, analyzing the causes of problems, generating large numbers of new ideas, generating ideas that are original, and assessing the strengths and weaknesses of ideas. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we wanted to have a productive task which was slightly more ecologically valid. So we included 2 open-ended idea generation questions, one at the pre-stage and one at the post-stage, and the order was randomized in terms of which one they saw first. And these are the questions, and hopefully they are relevant and engaging to the people responding. So the preliminary results, this is something that is tentative, and I'll give all the caveats as usual on small sample sizes later, but this kind of matches a signature in the literature that often you don't get a signal in the noise when you do objective tests, but that self-report measures do show an effect. And it's an interesting, that's an ongoing question as to why that might be for us. But there were slight increases in the DAT scores, the Divergent Association test scores pre and post the weekend, but they were not statistically significant. But there were increases as well in the 5 self-rating questions of competence. So this is a self-report measure. But the 2 that were significant were finding new opportunities for innovation and generating ideas that are original, which is interesting. Next slide, please. In terms of the focus group, we again had the wonderful scribe, Camille, to present and do an illustration of some of the findings. So a reminder of the 3 prompts we used. When and where do you feel you are most creative? What does it feel like? And what do you think creativity is? Finishing with the kicker, the kind of very difficult problem of definitions. And we got some very interesting responses, and the students seemed very engaged and interested in the topic. They tended to refer to things that you could consider to be related to the flow state, and also talk about mindset and identity and creativity as a process, which is an important distinction between the product of creativity. Often definitions of creativity include a sense of producing something novel and useful. And part of the reason for that is potentially that then you can tell, and from the external perspective, you can tell that something creative has happened. But that doesn't mean that necessarily creativity involves producing something tangible. It was also noted that there's a synchronicity to it, there's a social dimension to it. Creativity is distributed and in part a social collective process. Next slide, please. Are you rushing me, Michelle? Am I going too slow? So overall then, the caveats, as I said, small sample sizes we have and the other limitations, but what are the main challenges going forward? We noted, as Nicola noted, that the gaps in the literature are about how longitudinally things that are easy to measure, like intentions, translate into actual behavior, because the time frame of that is often longer than a 2-year project. It might be 5 years later that this finally culminates in some behavior you could measure. So that's a challenge for us. There's also a balance between the kind of core evaluation success criteria aspect to this and the research goals. And they overlap, of course, but sometimes the research, there's lots of interesting questions that are of benefit to the wider research community about creativity, what it is, that kind of thing, but aren't necessarily related directly to the success criteria of the project. There's a balance between using appropriate methods that are robust enough, but on the other hand, not potentially compromising engagement by being too intrusive and getting in the way of activities. And then, of course, whenever you're in a project with different institutions, and there are necessarily difficulties and problems and things to overcome with capturing data across the institutions. Thank you. So I think if we go to the next slide, I will hand back to Michelle.
Thank you. I can tell myself next slide.
Yeah.
It's just so exciting, isn't it? It makes me excited hearing you talk about all of this. I mean, what a lovely project that we get to like do new exciting things with students, and then we have this rigorous, research evaluation strand that can tell us about what's effective. It's just lovely. It's really nice. So I'll wrap up. I'll just spend 5-10 minutes wrapping up. So we've spent a lot of the summer actually sharing some of our findings so far. So we've been, very humbled and pleased that the entrepreneurship education community, which is a big community and was quite new to us, has really welcomed us. And we've been able to go to some really nice conferences and to share our findings so far. And one really nice presentation that we did in September was with me and then the 2 co-investigators from Central and from UAL, and we shared some of our key learning on the project at the International Entrepreneurship Education Conference. We've got some publications coming out, one with Advanced HE and another one that's a Springer series on entrepreneurship, and we've got lots of other plans for more dissemination as well. And what we are really keen to do and to focus on in the second year of the project is to really try to represent and to model best practice in terms of how we work with students, and in terms of this whole idea of how do you facilitate students feeling empowered to develop new ideas, to develop new initiatives. And here are just some examples of how we've tried to model best practice in the project. So we've got an advisory board member who is a specialist in access and inclusion. We try to, all the speakers we ask to work with the students, we try to make sure they represent the world as it is, rather than some of the slightly narrower representations we can get in our own world of classical music or of the creative industries. In our public talks, we've had those live captioned and interpreted with BSL, just so that we can hopefully reach as many people as we can. And we do have a dedicated research strand that is looking at the accessibility and inclusivity, but we don't have that data is still being analysed at the moment. We've done things like we've encouraged everybody to put their gender pronouns into Zoom, which is a small thing, but it matters to make sure that people are getting each other's pronouns right. Throughout the entire project, we try and let the students lead wherever possible. So it's about what they feel they need and want, and how we can just follow behind and just support and scaffold that. The whole project is putting the students first. And I think we've learned a lot from that, and we've learned about what exciting things can happen when you let the students lead. And for example, we have an advisory board. We've got Joe here from our advisory board, but that advisory board includes industry experts and industry experts who happen to also be our students, and we pay them for that work. So our advisory board includes our own students and we pay them. So they are experts, they are our advisors. And what we found is that again, you know, Gavin has found this in the work he's been doing with Artist Development 1. If you give students time and space and you let their creativity come out, you give them experimentation space, they come up with incredible things. I mean, this is what gets me up in the morning. If you can empower students to act on their values and to practice their art, they will change the world. And that's, you know, what this project is all about, which makes it just utterly thrilling to be a part of. So allowing students to forefront their values and who they are is really important. We always meet the students where they are. You know, what are you interested in? Who are your role models? What are your values? What do you hope to do with your art? That's where we start with. And I think we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about how I can work best with students in everything I do. I just want to show you that as well, this weekend that we put on at the beginning of November, it was actually quite diverse. In a way, it was more diverse than our student population at the RNCM. So 56.5% of our student attendees were white, but the rest weren't. And I think it's really nice to think that that event was quite accessible beyond just people who with white skin, because I think sometimes the creative industry struggled to be inclusive. But hopefully this project is helping some of that. So 2 more slides. First of all, what are we recommending for future? So what are our key learning points so far that we would share with other higher education institutions who are training creative industry students? We do it through everything we've done work with students, and the data shows that we need to better prepare students for freelance work and for any part of their employment where they might be leading a project, a new enterprise, setting up a business. There are ways we need to better prepare them, and it ranges from things like more financial skills, more business skills, right up to allowing them to take the lead while they're in our institutions. Let them try things out while they're with us in a safe space where it's okay to fail. And then when they go out and do it for real and they need it to be successful to pay the rent, they've already piloted it with us. Exposing students to what the industry is from the very moment they arrive with us is really important, and that they're part of that creative industry from the day they arrive, rather than falling off a cliff at the end of the 4 years when they leave us, or the 3 years when they leave University of the Arts. And we've talked a lot to Joe Bennett about this and learnt a lot from you, Joe. It's really important that we support student projects because they lead to social impact. And I think if we can support students with their new ideas, their new ventures, we can have that impact on society as people who work at these higher education institutions. And, you know, that's really, really satisfying and humbling. I think what we find is that there need to be mechanisms in place. One of the things Hannah is working on at the moment is a mentoring framework. There need to be mechanisms in place to take students through the journey of, I've got an idea, how do I develop it? What's my next step? How do I turn it into a business, a new ensemble, a new community initiative? There needs to be mechanisms in place. And we found that mentors are really important in showing students their own journey, reflecting them back. And we learned really early on, especially from conversations with Andy Pennill, that actually one of the best groups of people to bring in to inspire students is recent alumni who are just one more step along their journey than the students themselves. So it might not be best to bring in glittering superstars with amazing careers. It might be better to bring in people who are just one step on from students. So we've started to work much more with alumni. And what we found is that great things happen when you just give students the space, give them the resources, the facilities, the advisors, the mentors, but start with the students themselves, start with who they are, what their values are, and what they want to do with their art. So all of these things were taken into year 2. And I will leave the final word with the wonderful Liv Hamlin, who is a really nice example of what we've been able to do with the START project. So Liv Hamlin is a vocalist at the RNCM. She's now a final year. She was a 3rd year when she posted this tweet. And she went through our year 3 placement scheme, the Creative Innovators class, January to March. And then she had this idea about creating something that she felt very strongly about, which is supporting musicians and their mental health. And from January through to June, she went from just having an initial seed of an idea to creating a new charity and setting up a new charity. And she won our Creative Innovators Award, and she was awarded £2,000, partly from Yamaha, partly from the RNCM Principal Circle. And she's now collecting trustees, she's registering with the Charities Commission. And it's incredible to have seen her journey over just 6 months. And you can see that she very much attributes a lot of that to this START project, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, what more could we want? That's what the project's all about. So we've got some references, and that's it. But I'll just finish by saying this project is, it's a massive collective effort, and it involves everybody, students, lots of us working on the project, people across all 3 institutions, and our expert advisors, some of whom are here. But it's a huge collective effort, and it's a fantastic team and project to be part of. It's just an absolute thrill, and I'm really grateful to be part of it. So thank you to everyone who's been part of it. And I will end there. Oh, we've got Nigel here. Nigel, I didn't mention you, but Nigel Adams has also been an incredible advisor to us and source of support. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you very much, everyone, for the 3 of you for a fantastic presentation. So please give an initial round of applause before we go on to ask questions. And I've really got a much better sense of the project, because I've been hearing Michelle being with her wonderful infectious enthusiasm talking about, hello, sorry, is that Nigel? At the moment, here we go. Okay, talking about this project in various fora and at various meetings, but it's fantastic to hear just how it's going and the student experience, but also the research element, which often hasn't been unpicked in the sessions we've had before. And this is a perfect place to do that. We've got some brilliant audience members here who are already asking lots of questions. So I wonder whether I could call on them to start to voice those to the group more broadly. Pam, I just wonder, do you want to ask the first couple of questions, because you've been really engaged in the chat? Pam, are you there?
Thank you. I am here. Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you to this amazing team. The complexion and the complexity of practice research, actually bringing that into that entanglement, that interaction is so important. It's so innovative and it's so exciting. Thank you for being excited, Michelle. You're right at the cutting edge of knowledge creation here, and not like no other time, although it's always been prevalent, that people going into and being trained, educated into the creative industries, which is sort of like lambs to the slaughter to some extent. Like, how are they trained, how are they educated into that space, when it's so complex and so privileged in many respects. You really are doing this is so exciting. My questions are in the chat, but I'm going to just read one of them, if I can find one of them. I wrote a number of them because the scene, the setting and the focus kept changing. Okay, in which case I'll just sort of one of the questions really kind of relates to the business of how to move and locate these silos that are often the case, silos, how to broaden and fuse the boundaries, a fusion of unpredictable, kind of elements when it comes to being a musician, being an actor, being a photographer, and being kind of boxed into, genres, and the skills and the specialisms and those sort of modes of expression. So looking at how do we, what are you learning at this early point, about the blurring and the blending of new approaches for institutions to open themselves up to, thinking differently about how we categorize, careers, pathways, courses, structures. And what might happen, last question, what might happen because of this amazing study that changes the three institutions in terms of pathways? Will we see bridges across and something going on really innovatively in those three institutions that we are not seeing at the moment because of this study? I'll stop. I'm sorry. Was I speaking for 3 hours? I'm sorry.
No. A great question. Can I jump in? Nicola and Keith might have something to say as well. But yeah, great question. And yeah, I get excited by this idea, as you do, of just opening everything out and seeing what happens. And one of the really interesting, there's lots of things that have happened that have given us, that have made us realize that if you can bring together different perspectives, values, areas of expertise, experiences, exciting things can happen that couldn't happen otherwise. And I'll just give you one example. After we had this weekend event, that was really the first time that the three institutions had come together to do something on that scale. And what happened was we had 11 facilitators, we called them. We stressed to the students there was no hierarchy, we were all equal, there's no staff and students. And what happened was we co-facilitated. So I had a group of students and I was co-facilitating with someone from Central. And then the next day I was co-facilitating with someone from UAL. And what happened was we learned so much from one another. And we had this lovely little debrief. And someone from UAL said, you know what? A lot of your RNCM students are really driven by social enterprise ideas, whereas a lot of ours at UAL are driven by wanting to set up a business. And it just became really apparent that our students come from different perspectives, but also if you can bring those together, you could create things that wouldn't necessarily be able to happen in one institution alone. So there was so much learning, amongst those who were there as students and those who were there as facilitators, just about how much we aren't aware of each other's discipline and what each other is doing. And we never would have found that out without this project. And that will be something that will always impact what I do in future.
Wonderful, thank you, Michelle, for that response. I wonder whether Joe Bennett's also been very active in the chat, and I wonder whether he might like to ask a question. And I'm making a list of all the people with hands up, so thank you. It's I'll get to everyone, I'm sure. Okay, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to do so. As Michelle and others will know from our meetings, I've as in my role as the advisory group, for those who are unfamiliar with my work, I teach at Berkeley in Boston. I'm coming to you from the USA today, and I'm very excited by this project. We've been very keen to be a tiny part of it so far. I'm looking forward to getting more involved. So yeah, basically my angle on the semantics, which is where we started, has been always to advocate for the dictionary definition of entrepreneur in this project, as Michelle knows, and I'm going to quote it here. Entrepreneur, a person who organizes and operates a business or businesses taking on greater than normal financial risks to do so. And I think there's been an interesting set of forces in the project, partly a temptation to define entrepreneurship as a character trait of, the ability to take creative risks and be a broadly creative person, whatever that means. And the other end of that continuum, which is, how do you make cash out of your creative work? And I think that, and I have a question for the research team related to that, because that to me seems to me the hardest question to answer for an undergraduate in an undergraduate curriculum. And I asked my students, I teach a class called The Artist Entrepreneur at Berkeley, which is largely fledgling singer-songwriters trying to monetize their work, which is how does, when money actually lands in your bank account on a Tuesday morning, whose money is it, and what route did it take to get there, and how does it represent market or social sector, whatever, value in the creative work that you have done, whether that be the arts, usually the arts, but whatever creative work you've done. Now, so my question for the researchers is as follows: how does that question manifest itself when you talk to undergraduates? How do they phrase the, yes, that's all great, but where actually is the money? And do they ask you that? If they ask it, how do they ask it? If they don't ask it, why do you think that might be?
Yeah, so what a great question. It kind of gets to the real nub of it, doesn't it, Joe? I think we see that in a kind of level of maybe the longitudinal data that we shared, I think encapsulates that, in the sense that there is this real tension between, you know, what is it I need to do for a living and what is it I love to do. And I think the more we can scaffold the experience of the students in order to help them understand how those two things can actually be the same or related to each other. And it's, I think it's a really big question that we want to understand, because it's that turning point, it's those transition points that I think we are seeing, but we don't yet understand what they are, where those slight shifts in perception and identity happen. So I think, you know, depending on what stage students are, I think we'd get very different answers to that question.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Joe. One of those early conversations we had together, you kind of really opened our eyes in terms of we didn't have anything in the program where we talk, at least in the classical program, where we talk to students about money until year 4. We had it a little bit in year 3, but after those early conversations with you, we started to learn how important that was. We did ask the third years at one point, how much money do you think you need to rent a room in a house in Manchester post graduation with bills and food, and they had no idea. And we thought, wow, you know, we really need we need to start talking about that in year 1. And actually some of the work Gavin's done on the new year 1 module does include discussions about money. Oh, and he said in the chat, actually, we do it in year 2 as well. We have done it in year 2, but we've put it right back into year 1. But we haven't been as bold as some of the things you've done, Joe, which is to actually, you know, give them some money and get them to practice turning it into more money. Maybe we should take that leap.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily need to resource it, but there's a task I give my students at about week 10 of the semester, which actually they just finished, which is to do a spreadsheet of their first year's income and outgoings as in their sort of dream business outcome. And they are really good at the outgoings. They know how much a microphone costs. They know how much software costs. They eventually research how much rent costs, but they have no idea what the income streams are in their industry. So I'll say, okay, so you want an Instagram presence. You've got 10,000 followers as a guitar player. How are you monetizing that? Are you able to monetize it? Oh, you've had 10,000 views on YouTube of your pop video. Are you ad monetizing that? Do you know how much YouTube pays per click? Now that information is all out there, and they could conceivably put it into a spreadsheet. But even at an institution like Berkeley, which is very industry oriented, as you know, there's a real reluctance to do the research to find out where the money comes from. And I think it's because, to use an Americanism, it's one of those shit got real moments for a lot of the undergrads, when they, oh my gosh, I've really got to figure out. And I love your comment, Nicola, about and I think it was about you know, how much does it cost to pay the rent in Manchester? If that's £800 or whatever, then how much creative work does it take to make £800, and how? It's really hard questions to answer.
I wondered whether Andy wanted to come in at this point, because he's been engaging in the chat with a number of comments. Andy, do you want to come in?
Hi, thank you. Is my microphone still working? Yeah, great. I mean, Joe's point, I think, was brilliant. It's really why at QAA we split the enterprise and entrepreneurship. So that was my first point, that we can then look at the process-driven assessment, for example, in evaluation, looking at divergent thinking in the enterprise. And then the entrepreneurship side, we can actually look to monetization and ways of capturing that sort of value. And that is actually more predictable. You know, again, as Joe pointed out, you can go and look, you can find these things. When you're evaluating learner performance, you can do that. You can just go out and find out. So are you considering the different types of assessment, the process assessment against the unknowns and the assessment against the knowns in your future work?
Do you mean, yeah, it's a great question. Do you mean the assessment that in terms of the assessment the students complete?
Yeah, when the students, I mean, if I can give an example, with my own students, they were always, I don't teach them now, but they were always scared of the money side.
Yeah.
So introduce them to tangibles, like how long things take. Then what did this job cost? How many weeks did it take? How many weeks would it take you? And so introduce them softly into this whole concept of being able to, in this case, monetize, but we can add value in many ways. But those are against tangibles. Those are against things you can measure. So the divergence side of things is more about the, can you see they're going about it the right way? Is the process right? So they're quite different ways of evaluating and informing through formative feedback, maybe, learners. So have you considered anything along those lines? Or, and if you have, what are they?
Yes and no. So we could probably do much more on this and learn much more about it. And I think one of the things we have done a lot of is supporting students in reflecting. And again, Gavin's led a lot of this. So we've always had reflection as a key part of our assessment with student projects. And we rather than assessing the output, we've very much always assessed the reflection. But we have now built this in a lot more into the work, into the new program actually. And we started to use things like Loop Me, which is quite widely used, isn't it, in the entrepreneurship education world. So we haven't done anything more concrete, but we have stressed to students that the main thing you're assessed on is, so they do produce, for example, in their fourth year projects, they produce project plans and timelines. So we have stressed that one of your main learning outcomes that you will be judged against is, can you plan something? Can you adapt? Can you reflect on why the adaptation was necessary? Can you talk about how you need to do something differently the next time?
Can I just interrupt you? Are you mapping what you are delivering against helping them to become more flexible?
No.
Okay.
But it would be good to do that. Do you know ways of doing that?
Yeah, I've been doing it for a long time.
Great, we should do that.
We
we don't have any of that in place.
It's just sorry, I'm jumping in. I'll get off now. But I've been tracking alumni for about 35 years, as you know, and the 20-year stage is when I get all the ones we really learn to be flexible and adaptable, and they can actually tell you when, by reflecting, how they learned that in the study program.
Wow, that much later on, they can still pinpoint it. Wow, in fact, we maybe have some of that data in the alumni survey. Because we have asked in the alumni survey, some of the questions we've asked are around what training do you feel was most useful to you and what training might have been useful that you didn't have, which we've only just started looking at. So we might have some of that in there.
It takes a long time, but it's super valuable. But
just
to sort of, if you just go back to the divergent and convergent thinking, they're quite different things. So if you actually map the student support, the learner support, it's just something that I think is perhaps the next stage, and so it's why we split enterprise and entrepreneurship in the UK quality work, so that it facilitates that.
That's a really good point. Map exactly what they're doing and then map what they reflect on as having been important in terms of where they've gone. That's a really good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just on that same point, reflecting on the differences between the institutions as well. It's interesting that we've seen like Central, for example, in their entrepreneurship awards. So I was on the panel for their awards last year, and they really emphasize in their assessment the financial planning and project planning. And comparing with the RNCM awards, that's important, but I would say the quality of the idea, the innovative nature of the idea is much more foregrounded. So there's a kind of a cultural difference, which is reflected also in those discussions you had, Michelle, and through your co-facilitation. So there are some learnings that we can certainly, and connections we can make across the institutions too in this, I think.
Thank you. There's some great discussions going on here. I'd like to ask if Gavin Waite would like to ask his question.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Barbara. Sorry to hide behind this photo. I would like to know if you could tell us anything about the cross-institutional learning that's taken place. Are the experiences similar between the institutions? You've mentioned a bit about some different focuses, perhaps, that students might have, but what can you tell us about that?
It's a really good question at this time, actually, because when we were preparing, we gave this presentation in September at the Entrepreneurship Education Conference. And what we presented was our key learning points. And how we did it was I wrote a list of what I considered to be our key learning points across the project in terms of the things we put in place to work with students. And then I asked the two project partners if there was anything I'd missed and what they saw as the most important things on my list. And gradually, through a process of lots of emails over summer, we whittled it down and we presented 3 key learning points. So there were definitely some that weren't common across all 3 institutions. And one example of that is definitely for us at the RNCM and for Central, one of our key learning points is that students are driven very much by social values. So they are less interested in how you set up a business and make lots of money, and they are more interested in how you set up a business that can pay the rent, but has a big social impact. Whereas at UAL, they are more focused, and I don't know whether that's the nature of their degree programs or an intake effect. They are more focused on setting up a business. And I think that's partly because if you're training in jewelry design, that's one of the normal routes. So there are some differences in our learning points. The 3 that we presented that were common at this conference were, first of all, money matters, we called it. So in other words, you have to have these conversations around how you're going to pay the rent, how you're going to make money, and you have to have them early. So that's one of our key learning points across the project. Another one was that in taking account of the whole artistic individual is important. So you have to take account of who the students are as an individual and their values, which might not necessarily be the same with students on other degree programs, but who students are and what they value and what is important to them is really key. And we found that across the 3 institutions. And the other one, I forgot what the other one was. The other one was around student artistic identity. So artistic identity, and it links back to some of the quotes that Nicola presented, the Ruth Bridgestock's work and other people's work on that idea that artistic identity is sometimes seen as incompatible with making money. And that a key learning point across all 3 of our institutions is that we need to try and bring those together, so that when our students go out into the world, they don't feel that they have to take a job outside the creative industries to pay the rent. They can actually marry up their artistic identity and their need to pay the rent, and they can go into the world and do work that meets both of those objectives, which I think sometimes is we don't train them in enough. Does that make sense, Gavin? Is that?
Yeah, that does. Yeah, it just made me think that those, in particular, those issues of the personal value and the identity, they're at the centre of what we do in year 1 that we're trying for the first time this year, the creative space, and that the students have all of these different creative abilities that we don't really know about until we give them the opportunity to do them and to show. And that is possibly the key to their future success, is what makes them who they are creatively. That will then influence their musical development and how their careers could progress.
It's amazing, the Artist Development 1 and 2 modules that you're leading, Gavin. I think they're incredible.
Thanks. It's team effort, of course. It's just as part of this of the overall the START program, but also the general supportedness across the college has allowed that to happen. So it's brilliant news, really.
Great. So I believe Pam is leaving us. So thank you for your participation and energetic engagement with the talk.
Thank you, Pam.
Susanna has had her hand up for the longest time imaginable, and I've made a list, but now it is Susanna's moment. So over to you.
Thank goodness it's a virtual hand, because it's really totally painless. So thank you very much. One interesting talk, and it's so good to hear about entrepreneurship in this way, and creativity. So I've been doing some work in the last 18 months on what freelance musicians have been up to, how they've been impacted by COVID. So we carried out a first study, and I'm now in the process of writing up the follow-up a year on what they've been up to. And what's really interesting is in this group of 24 musicians, 12 late career and 12 mid-career ones, I think they've shown incredible examples of entrepreneurship. And one of the things that I wanted to say in terms of creativity and encouraging students to with their creativity and entrepreneurship, and in terms of the transferability of skills, one of the themes that has really shone through is the intrinsic motivation of these musicians, and the fact that they are so highly intrinsically motivated, and that they are self-regulated learners. And in terms of training, I think that these are really valid and golden things to be thinking about. I mean, just in terms of the transferability of skills, just as an example, one of the players, he had started off a distillery, and in his process of cultivating fine gins, he was using a lot of the skills that he'd used, his small business skills, and also in terms of his self-regulation and the way he practiced his instrument. He actually talked about how he was refining his gin using the same type of thought process that he was using when he was learning how to play his instrument better. And there were lots of examples. Somebody else, incredible creativity, had learned a TEFL course, moved country, and was starting to work out how she could combine teaching English to young students with music. So these are just sort of a few examples of their resourcefulness and their internal motivation, and that they were self-regulated learners, that they managed to they have whatever, they have the processes, the thought processes in place to be able to channel those ideas and develop them. And which made me think, just in terms of this bit of research, in terms of developing self-efficacy and confidence as well, that in terms of training, I mean, I'm sure that I'm just sort of throwing things out, and the project that you're doing sounds fantastic, but I just thought, listening to these guys who are in the process of transferring their skills in a way that they certainly had not anticipated, and it's wonderful that you're doing this course, because you're doing this research because one of the things that shines out is the importance of broadening what it means to be at music college. But I do think that learning how to be a self-regulated learner is important.
Thank you, Susanna. That's absolutely brilliant. And yeah, that research that you've been publishing recently and before that is so important. And yeah, as Gavin says, it informed some of the design of these modules. I think as well, one of the things that you made me think of is, and it links to some of the conversations we've had with people like Andy, is that quite often our students don't realize the competencies and the skills that they already have and that they've developed through their creative practice. And one of the things we are starting to try and do more of, and that we've done with some groups of students, but not all, and we did introduce this a little bit in that weekend event, is to give them mechanisms to reflect on what they've got, and to think about things like effectuation. Start with what you've got and then think about what you can create. And I think sometimes we don't do that enough with students, for them to just sit down and reflect on all of those amazing skills that they have, that they bring to the world, and that they don't realize are hugely relevant and important and significant in so many walks of life. So it's a good point, and we should carry on trying to do a bit more of that, I think.
Thank you. Nigel, you were on my list as the next person to invite to come on, even before you put your hand up, because of your discussion in the chat. So please, over to you.
It's hello. It's just that well, Andy's been involved in this kind of business, and we're grey-haired old fellas, as you can see, and we've been around for a long time. But sometimes some of the things we come up with are matching our age, boring, and has all been done before, and therefore, with your wonderful creative students, I just wonder if there are ways of people coming up with what I keep hammering my students for and my colleagues who are running things. Can we do something different, please? You know, it's all very good. We've been running our pitch competition. Well, our pitch, which our students at Buckingham have to start a business to get their degree. So it's quite phenomenal, but that's a pitch competition. You know, if you could come up with something different that you're already doing, or Nicola and your other colleagues who are researching it, let's try and be really different. And then we can be innovative and we can have a go. And if we can actually do things together, then, you know, replace all these grey-haired old fellas with some new kids who can do the job better. You know, that was what I would be saying anyway. That's it. And Andy might even be smiling at this point because, you know, he and I have sort of chunted on a lot for a long time. And we need more people like your kids around to do the job in a different way. Absolutely picking up what we need to do today and tomorrow because it's their future. That's it. I'm going quiet now.
No, I love it. I love it, Nigel. I love it. And we've had such exciting chats with you about kind of, you know, doing exciting things and taking risks and doing new things. I think you're absolutely right. And I think in a way we should be taking more risks. I'll give you one example of one of the things we've talked about, but we haven't really moved on, but we probably should move on, is that we had a little set of meetings over the summer where we caught up with lots of people and said, yeah, and we chatted to you and we chatted to lots of people and said, what do you think we should be doing with the project? And one of the conversations we had was with staff internal to the RNCM. And one of the outcomes of that discussion was that we thought about, wouldn't it be great if we could create some kind of regular kind of open mic space, which is where anyone can come, staff, students, anyone, any institution, and it's a forum where you just share something new. It might be a performance, it might be a new artwork, but it might just be, hey, how about we do something in response to climate change? Or like just a big space where people are encouraged to just be as risky as possible. And that's the kind of thing that I think we should get that off the ground, because that would be really exciting.
I'll offer you, Buckingham's a wonderful place. It's between all of you. And it's nobody ever comes here because there's no train tracks, more than I haven't been for about 70 years. But we've got a place called Milton Keynes, which isn't far away. And we've also got, you'll be pleased to know, some of you met our very small students union team. We've spent some money with that Clatten money. You know, we got the 2 million from the richest woman in Germany. Well, we've spent some of it on getting the student location, which is called the old Tanlaw Mill. That's actually been completely renovated by a design team to make it look like far more of a student hub. And it's going for creativity. It's going for, it's opening on the 17th of December. Okay, and you know we've got our super building as well, our enterprise hub, which we have creatives coming. We have a lovely artist lady who comes in. We have a whole range of different people, not just business people. And like other people have said, our students are far more socially oriented than ever people were in the past. And we've got to encourage that more, but show them that social is great, but you've got to make some money first. Then you do good things with it. But being just social isn't going to get, sorry, I'm a grumpy old fella, it isn't going to get you anywhere. What you're going to do is make the money, then do good things with it. So if we could do something like that in the new year, that would be rather good.
That would be great. Yeah, we're in. See you in Buckingham on the 17th of December.
You'll be very welcome.
On that note, I have a sort of final question as we start to think of this session coming to an end. It's been so stimulating, but I did note when you talked about the research and the project that you have a timeline of 2 years. So it suggests that you're going to have great findings in 2 years, but there's a lot more to do. So my question is, what's next? Is it more with the same collaboration, or is it looking at perhaps a different new project that continues some of this work, perhaps in collaboration with with others. So it's an open question. You don't really need to answer it too fully, but it seems that there's more than another year left for this topic and for this project.
Yeah, we want to change the world. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's got to be one of our big focuses now is how can we make sure when the money runs out that this not only continues, but, you know, becomes even richer and deeper. I think one of the key ways that we'll do this is it's just so exciting to feel that we are part of this network of entrepreneurship education with people like Andy and Nigel and lots of other people who've kind of, you know, taken us under their wing a little bit. And those relationships, I think, will help us to continue developing this work, and that won't go away. I think one of the things we need to make sure we do is that we are led by the students. So one of the things we need to spend a lot of time on in summer is to make sure we understand from the students what they found to be most beneficial and what they would like more of. But then we've got, the very complicated task of thinking how we can embed this and keep it going when the resource falls away, and a lot of that resource is staff time. So it's hugely challenging. But I think the one thing that I'm most confident in is that we feel just so passionately about this. You know, it's not the kind of thing that the funding's run out, so I stopped doing that part of my job. You know, to me, it's become the thing I absolutely get out of bed for. It's made me feel like I can help this next generation of people who are going to lead the creative sector. So, you know, why would you stop doing that? There's going to be challenges around what we can do and how we do it, but it won't stop. And those relationships with the two partners, I think, will absolutely continue. They'll continue on a smaller scale, I think. But things like we've had a lot of things where we've done things with each other, especially with Central. So like Nicola joined them for their Entrepreneurship Award. 2 of their staff joined our speed networking and worked with our students. And I think those kind of things we've all found to be so enriching that we will continue working together. But what would be nice as well is to start to work with even more industries, with even more partners in that KEF cluster, and to just carry on sharing and learning from one another, because we just don't get a chance to do that in our daily lives enough, do we? And you learn so much reaching across institutions.
I guess one of the questions that's often asked of a funded project, you know, what is the future and how can it be sustained in some way? And also, I guess, because of the nature of this project, how is it really fully embedded in the various curricula of your institutions? And I guess that's where some of your thoughts there, we need to think about that, and maybe apply for more funding from somewhere.
Yeah, maybe Nigel could give us the email address of this rich person. Get £2 million.
Well, that's always a good thing. So I think it is time to wrap it up. But this has been a really exciting and stimulating session. We've heard so much from the project team, but also from the advisory board and from others who have a related interest in aspects of entrepreneurship or the experience of the musician, of the sort of independent musician. Thank you to the team, and thank you to the audience for such a great discussion. And I'm sure you'll be hearing from the Start Entrepreneurship project again very soon. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you next week. It's on Tuesday and it starts at 5 o'clock. It's live, it's on Zoom, and it's online. So please do join us, and the tickets for free are available on our website for next week's event. Please do come, because the person who's giving the sessions is getting a fellowship of the RNCM. He's our International Chair of Musicology, and he's coming all the way from France to be with us. So please do join us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Barbara.
Nice to see you. Thanks.